I'm not a Dan Bongino fan. I'll be the first one to admit that. He's talked smack about me on his former radio show, but the FBI director went on Fox News earlier today, doubling down, saying that there's no question that Jeffrey Epstein took his own life and committed suicide. And now he's claiming that there's going to be a video that is going to be released showing that nobody went in and out of the cell where allegedly Jeffrey Epstein committed suicide. Now, I'm not buying this, and there's a lot of other people that are not buying it, and I wanted to get this man's take, who joins us right now on the show. His name is Mark Epstein. He's Jeffrey Epstein's brother, and he's nice enough to join us right now. Mark, I appreciate you coming on, sir. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
Doing good, Mark. I appreciate your time. I want to go back a few weeks. What was your first reaction when you heard that Kash Patel and Dan Bongino were claiming that there was no doubt in their mind that your brother committed suicide? What went through your mind when you heard that?
Well, I'm curious what made them come to that conclusion. This is almost 6 years after the death, and I don't know what they're referring to. And like I said, I have no idea what they're basing that opinion on, because the facts sort of point the other way, and they're not addressing that. And the government is holding back a lot of information that you would think they would readily give if this was a clear-cut suicide.
Why do you think they're not doing that?
First, let me make one thing perfectly clear.
Sure.
When I first heard that Jeffrey was dead from an apparent suicide, I just accepted that as fact. At the time, I had no reason to doubt it. Under the circumstances, it's kind of understandable. I wasn't on a date. I didn't speak to Jeffrey for a while. I didn't speak to him when he was in jail at all. But then the autopsy was done, and there was an article in the Post today saying that Barbara Sampson, the chief medical examiner, did the initial autopsy and declared it a suicide. That's patently untrue. Barbara Sampson, the chief medical examiner, never saw the body. The autopsy was done by Dr. Roman, who was a city pathologist, and Dr. Bodden was there witnessing the whole thing. They came out of the autopsy, and they said they couldn't call it a suicide because it looked too much like a homicide. So that started raising questions. And then I heard the Attorney General Bill Barr come online and say that he saw the videotape of the camera outside of the tier that showed the door to the tier, not the door to the cell, the door to the tier. And he said nobody went in or out, and that convinced him it was a suicide. And I thought that's a pretty ridiculous statement because, number one, he said he personally saw the videotape. I said, why is the Attorney General personally watching this videotape? Yeah. You could have people watch it and say nobody went in or out. And then also, there were 11 or 12 other prisoners on the tier. And if cell doors were unlocked, as I've been told they were, somebody could go in, kill somebody, go back to their cell. They don't have to go from the tier. And to think that somebody could get to that tier door, go inside, kill somebody, and leave completely undetected is just asinine.
I agree.
There's 6 levels of security before you get to that door.
Mark, so, if somebody murdered your brother, which I think is a strong possibility, who do you think did it, and why do you think they did it? I know that might be a hard question for you to answer, but who do you think was responsible? Who wanted your brother dead?
Well, I don't know. I wasn't involved with Jeffrey's businesses or his activities. We didn't spend a lot of time together the last couple of decades, but we spoke and we were always in communication. But there's other facts. If you look at, Jeffrey, the autopsy showed that Jeffrey was dead for at least 2 hours, minimum of 2 hours, and that's disputable. That's a fact. Okay, so he was found at 6-something in the morning, which means the latest he could have died was 4-something in the morning. Right? And then you see this photograph of the EMT guys, wheeling him out of the prison to go to the hospital, and he's on a gurney, he's got a neck brace on, and he's intubated. Right. They're trying to squeeze the balloon to put air into him. Now, these are trained medical people. They would know that a guy who's dead for 2 hours is not revivable. I mean, he was dead. So I want to know who was directing the show there. Who was trying to make it look like he was alive? I have a photograph of him in the hospital on a gurney, dead, wearing a hospital gown. The kind where you put your arms in and it ties in the back. So who decided to dress a dead body in a hospital gown? Normally dead bodies are either in a body bag or covered by a sheet.
Yes.
I can't get a copy of the 911 call. Who called the 911 call when they first found him? And what did they say? Fire department doesn't have a record of that anymore. And the department's headquarters, to get a copy of the report that was filled out by the EMT guys, because they fill out a report on every call they make.
So, Mark, you're asking very good questions here, and this is bizarre stuff. Now, I would say that there are a lot of MAGA Republicans out there that some of them were asking some of those same questions that you're asking, but now it appears to me that Kash Patel and Dan Bongino are running the show. Now all those things have gone to the side. You know, they're not saying these things anymore. They're saying, well, there's no question in my mind that Jeffrey Epstein committed suicide. Why is it you think that they've changed their tune from going to talking about some of the things that you just mentioned and now pushing that off to the side and saying, nope, nothing to see here? Why do you think that is, Mark?
Well, because I think there's a cover-up. It's something I listened to an interview that Patel did with Brett Vaya, and he was saying how long it takes to get these things out. And I thought it was interesting because he said, in part of what he said, he goes, they have to go through, he said, years of investigations, years of political maneuvering, years of cover-up. What cover-up? The government's been running this whole show. I've been not getting information from the government, since the time of the deaths almost 6 years ago. So he mentioned cover-up. If there's a cover-up, it's the government covering something up.
Right.
I'm not covering anything up. Nobody else is in a position to cover anything up. So that might have been like a slip of the tongue on his part, but he's the one that mentioned cover-up.
Right, right. Now, we've been hearing for years, Mark, and you probably don't know any more than I do about this, but we've been hearing for years, there's a Jeffrey Epstein list, right? We've heard about this list. And then all of a sudden, Pam Bondi a few months ago says, we're going to release the Epstein files. And as you know, they didn't release really anything. So two-part question. Do you believe that Pam Bondi is lying and that there's no real list out there? Or do you believe there is a list and it could compromise somebody like a Donald Trump?
Okay, first of all, you have to understand, anytime something comes up in the news about this, my phone starts ringing from journalists all over.
Right.
When the lists come up, what I was telling people was, I don't believe there's a list of anything. Jeffrey's telephone book has been public for years. Mm-hmm. It's very extensive. I don't think there was going to be a list of new names or anything that was going on. And if there was a client list, they were referring to it as a client list, it was people he probably did financial work for.
Do you believe that's the case with like a Bill Clinton and a Donald Trump? As we know, your brother once said on tape that Donald Trump was one of his best friends. Obviously, he was close to Bill Clinton and very many prominent people. Your brother was a very prominent and wealthy man. So are you saying that these people that were in your brother's orbit, you believe, were financial partners? Is that what I'm getting from you?
No. I'm saying they were talking, they're looking for some list to come out. Right. And I'm saying, what kind of list would this possibly be? I didn't think there was any kind of list of any kind of new names, because like I said, his personal phone book has been published for years. Mm-hmm. So were they looking for new names, people that were not on in his phone book? I'm curious to see whatever list they were talking about. I think people, or the news people, they're looking for some kind of salacious story. A list. These are girls. These are people that Jeffrey was selling girls to or something like that. He wasn't selling girls. He was charged, and his crime was he was with girls that were too young. Right. That was his crime. Mm-hmm. There's no indication he was selling anybody. Jeffrey didn't need to sell girls or anything else to make money. Yeah. He's a very wealthy man, and he knew how to make money with investments. That was his business.
What would you say to many people on the far right that want to continually bring up, quote unquote, Epstein Island, and he was bringing all these people in from Hollywood, and they were with underage girls? I haven't seen any evidence to prove the point that, he was doing that he was bringing in all these celebrities into Epstein Island. When you hear the term Epstein Island, and it's usually brought up by people on the far right, what goes through your mind, Mark?
Well, Jeffrey had the islands there, and people he had people on his island, and, if here's the bottom line, and I'm not saying this is what took place, but if he flew people to the island and they had some kind of wild, crazy orgy and they were all over 18 and all consenting, there's nothing illegal about that.
Correct.
There's swingers clubs all over the country having wild parties. This is nothing unique. Right. People may look down on it or frown upon it or not approve of it. Not illegal. Mm-hmm. If the girls are underage, that makes it illegal. Mark, and that's what the crime was.
Understood. So, Mark, if you had the opportunity right now to be in a room with Kash Patel and Dan Bongino, I'm curious, Mark, what would you say to them?
Well, first, I've asked for and haven't been able to get the camera that we know was working, the one that Bill Barr referred to, showing the tier to the door to the tier. I've been asking to get the videotape footage from that camera from 6 in the morning until 8 in the morning,
Mm-hmm.
because that would show when they took Jeffrey's body off the tier. I also want to see the videotape by the infirmary in the hospital, in the prison. That's where they took his body. There's cameras all over that place. This way we'd be able to see what condition he was in when they took him off the tier. But I can't get it. Now I'm being told, at first I was told that I couldn't get it because of the investigation. Now that the investigation is over, they're now telling me that the cameras that were working do not show that area. We know it shows that area because Bill Barr referred to it. I saw Matt Getz on a podcast recently, and he said that Bill Barr should be put under oath to answer questions about this. I agree with that.
Yeah. I mean, do you have any interest in speaking with Maxwell at all, by the way? Any interest
No, I
at all?
haven't. No, not really. I haven't seen or spoken to her in decades.
You recall the last conversation you had with your brother? I'm sure that's probably not an easy thing to talk about, but do you remember the last conversation you had with Jeffrey?
Yeah, actually I do. He called me it was a Thursday night. He was in Paris,
Mm-hmm.
and it was just a normal brother-to-brother call. You know, how you doing? What's new? Whatever. And then he flew home the next day, Friday, and he was arrested.
Yeah.
That conversation Thursday night was the last conversation we had. It was inconsequential. It was nothing.
Right.
You know, just normal conversation between two brothers.
I can't imagine, Mark, what it's like for you to know that your brother is always in the news. He's always being talked about. I mean, it's got to be difficult for somebody like you. You know, you didn't do anything wrong, right? It's not your fault, anything that took place. How has that been like for you?
It's not really difficult. I mean, it's 6 years ago, so like the initial shock of losing a brother is sort of over. It was difficult at the early stages because a lot of people in the media were trying to link me to some of these activities, and I started getting death threats. I had hire armed guards at times, you know, so it was crazy. You know, you talk about Jeffrey said that Trump, that he said he was good friends with Trump, or Trump was a good friend of his. There's also a tape that Steve Bannon has where Jeffrey said that he stopped hanging out with Trump when he realized Trump was a crook. That's on tape.
Interesting. Do you believe that?
Yes.
When you say crook, what do you mean?
I saw the videotape.
Yeah.
I saw the videotape of Jeffrey saying that. So to ask me if I believe it, it's a moot question.
When did you ever talk to Jeffrey about that, about Donald Trump?
Not in any major way. But when I saw the videotape, I asked Jeffrey what it was for.
Right.
You know,
right.
It wasn't anything important at the time.
I want to ask you this flat out, Mark. Do you believe that your brother was murdered?
I do now, yeah.
You do now. So you didn't believe it at the time, but you believe now that this was an inside job, for lack of a better term, and that your brother, there was a hit on your brother to kill your brother, and you believe there are multiple people involved. Because if he was killed, there has to be multiple people involved, right?
I would imagine so, but I have been, for the last almost 6 years, I've been sticking to the facts. You're asking me to speculate, okay? And I've not been speculating because I don't want to do that. I just want to stick to the facts and get answers to legitimate questions.
Well, I think one reasonable person would come to the conclusion, if you're not getting those answers, which, by the way, I think your questions are very understandable and reasonable, that would only lead one to conclude that they're hiding something, right, Mark?
They're hiding a lot. I mean, I have a lot of questions. I've not enough time in this little phone interview, but I can fill you up with questions for hours.
And
all legitimate questions. Now, also, for instance, I was told by somebody on the scene that there was somebody with a handheld video camera in the prison and in the hospital. Where's the footage from that video camera?
Do you believe?
Now, here's another question.
Yeah.
Since you want questions, we know about the two guards that got in trouble, you know, for not doing their rounds.
Right.
Okay. Now, one was Michael Thomas, and the other was the female one. Now, we know that Michael Thomas came on shift in the middle of the night.
Mm-hmm.
So he wasn't there at 10 o'clock something when they locked up the tier for the night. Tova Noel, she was the woman who was there. And there's also in the early reports mention of an unnamed guard number 1 and an unnamed guard number 2, because there is never just one guard there. There's always at least 2 guards.
Mm-hmm.
So who were the guards? Why do we know Thomas's name and the woman's name? They're not naming who unnamed guard number 1 is, or unnamed guard number 2. Why? Why is that so secret?
Yeah, that's a good
Who
point.
are they? Were they really guards or were they plants? Now,
I
I
have.
told you before. Go ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Mark. I was just going to say I have to ask you this. This obviously happened under the Donald Trump first administration. I know this is
Yes.
speculation. I understand
Mhm.
that. But with that being said, do you believe that there is a possibility that either Donald Trump or somebody in his administration close in his orbit could have been a part of your brother's demise behind bars?
Well, I look at it this way. Again, I'm told you, I'm reluctant to speculate. I like looking at facts. Fact, Bill Barr was the Attorney General of the United States at the time. Bill Barr worked for Donald Trump. Bill Barr came out with that ridiculous statement, which led me to believe initially that it's a cover-up. Until that point in time, I believed that he killed himself. And then there's a lot of other facts that are not general knowledge. In a few days after the death, Jeffrey had a hearing scheduled to appeal the bail decision. Okay, and the bail was being substantially raised. So, maybe unlikely, there's maybe a chance he could have got bail because it would have been the highest bail ever in the United States.
Right.
That was coming up in a few days. Now, knowing Jeffrey, if he knew this hearing was coming up and he was thinking about killing himself, wouldn't you wait a few days? Because if he got the bail, he'd be living in his house, with armed guards and ankle monitoring cameras. He wouldn't have to languish in jail for a year. If the hearing came up and bail was denied again,
yeah,
I said, okay, he didn't want to be a year in jail, so he killed himself. More understandable. But why would you kill yourself a few days before?
Doesn't make sense.
Trying to post the highest bail in U.S. history.
It's a really good point, Mark, you bring up. Mark, are you in fear of your life that if you're out there and you continue to push for answers, which, by the way, I don't blame you for doing so, are you in fear of your life? Or are you in fear that people will be out to get you because of who your brother was and the fact that you're questioning, the FBI deputy director? Are you in fear for your life?
No, I'm not really in fear of my life. I mean, I'm not. This is why I don't appear on camera anywhere. I don't need people. I travel a lot. I don't need being somewhere with people, recognizing me. But right. I'm not in fear of my life. No. At the early stages with the death threats, I was in touch with the New York City Police Department and the FBI. But I'm not really in fear of my life.
Last question, Mark, and I really do appreciate your time. What do you think is the biggest misconception by the general public and the media when it comes to your brother, when it comes to your family, anything? What is like the biggest issue that you have that people think about your family or think about your brother that you would want to set the record straight?
I've been asked that a number of times, and I said before, I don't feel it's my job to defend my brother because he did things he shouldn't have been doing. I'm not trying to say he was an angel, but I don't want to get into the character stuff or the family stuff.
Sure.
I'm just concerned about, I think my brother was killed, and I just don't want somebody just getting away from it scot-free.
I'm with you on that 150%. Your questions deserve answers, by the way. Do you think you'll ever get them? You think you'll ever get these answers?
Likely not, but I want the questions out there.
Yeah.
Look, we still don't know everything about JFK, right? It's 60 years later.
That's true. That's absolutely true. Hey, Mark, listen, I'm sorry for what you've had to go through. You've done nothing wrong, your family, and I wish you the best, and I do appreciate your time coming on, and I do hope you get those answers, my friend. And if some more stuff comes out, we'd love to have you back on. But, Mark, I really do appreciate your time and wish you the continued success with your business and real estate and all that stuff. And
thank you. I just hope we all get these answers, not just me. Everyone should have these.
We're all taxpayers. We all deserve the answers. We pay the salaries of the FBI director, Dan Bongino, and others. So I agree with you. I'm with you on that 100%. Mark, I really do appreciate it.
I would be willing to sit in a room with them and debate this and point out things and try to get answers from them face to face.
We all deserve it, especially you. This was your brother. You deserve to know how your brother died, and I'm with you 150% on that. And it smells funny to me, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I don't think this is a conspiracy theory. Your questions deserve answers. Mark, I do appreciate your time, my friend. Thank you so much, and be well, okay?
You as well. Thank you.
Thank you. That's Mark Epstein, everybody.